Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think it's really encouraging that everybody has shown up for this. A little bit of housekeeping. I mentioned it before, but this is more for the press that are coming in. I'm going to ask the organizations that are participating to share your preferred press contact information in the chat box, so that the reporters can reach out to you for any additional questions and follow-ups that they may have. We will be compiling these emails and including them in the email blast that will go out to all of our press contacts and also to you that registered today. And it will also include the press release that's related to this briefing. We have about 8 speakers today, and we'll probably try to get through them as fast as we can. We have about 10 minutes per person. And we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for general questions. Feel free to enter any questions in the chat box as we go along. We will answer them at the end. So why are we here today? And so primary reason is that we are running out of time. The Census Bureau, and I think you'll hear from the New York City Census Office, and all the organizations here on the call today are participating has been termed as a census push week. This is a last-minute effort to get out the count before the Census Bureau sends out staff on August 11th to count the people that have not responded themselves, either online or over the phone. There's a lot of ad buys that are going out now, so our community should be hearing from various sources, and hopefully your outlets were part of that ad buy. Feel free to contact us if your outlet is interested and wasn't part of it, and we can see what we can do. We can share information and see if there's any additional ad buys left over, or see if there's any opportunities for organizations separate from the Census Bureau. So that's another thing that we wanted to alert you about. We're coming under the auspices today of the Asian Pacific American Complete Count Committee, APA-CCC. This is a group. I want to thank Chuck Park from Minkwon and Farzana Linda as two of the primary drivers and leaders of the CCC for bringing together this citywide coalition of immigrant, cultural, religious, health, labor, housing, and social service groups to help ensure that all New Yorkers, especially Asian Pacific Americans, to be counted in the 2020 census. The coalition has done a lot of great work, but we still, because of various factors, COVID and immigration policies and things like that, have a lot of barriers to overcome. Hopefully, a lot of you have already talked about the census and carried stories about how the census is important to our communities. So our focus today is more about an urgent call to action, an urgent request to our communities to participate. The census, I think a lot of people are unaware that the census has been extended because of COVID, but now time is kind of running out. We have a few more weeks before we really move into another phase of the census. I'm going to highlight some statistics on how our communities are responding to the census and the reason why it's so urgent for us as Asian Pacific Americans to get the word out for our communities to participate. And then other speakers today are going to talk about what their organizations are doing to help encourage census participation, and then talk specifically about some of the new challenges that have emerged. So the stats, these will be included in the press release. As of today, New York City's response rate, this is the number of households that have sent back a form divided by the total number of households that are contacted. So it includes potentially empty households, and so that's a different challenge that we have to take into account. But that 53.7% for the New York City as a whole is lower than the statewide number, which is 57.9%, and lower than that for the country as a whole, which is 62.3%. If we look at neighborhoods or areas with a high percentage of Asian populations, we find that those areas are averaging a 52.4% response rate, and that's even lower than the New York City response rate. These lower response rates will result in less accurate counts of our communities because there's a lot of studies that have shown that self-response is the most accurate way to collect census data. And it's going to end up leading to less representation in elected offices, less funding for community services such as schools and hospitals, roads, and public transportation over the next decade. If we dive into specific Asian groups, we show that Bangladeshis are responding at a 50.6% rate, Chinese at 52.3%, Filipino at 51.3%, and Indian community at 48.1%. These are all lower than the city's self-response rate as a whole. Two signs of encouragement are the Korean and the Pakistani communities, which both have higher self-response rates. The Korean community is at 57.7%, which is actually approaching the state level response rate, which is 57.9%. And the Pakistani community was at 55.2%, which was higher than the citywide response. Nevertheless, both of those values are below the national numbers and count, relatively speaking, that's pointing towards potential disadvantage for our communities. I think at this point, I'm going to stop there and be happy to dive into like neighborhood numbers and reach out if press have specific interest in those communities. We noticed in prior analyses that areas like Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park, Sunset Park, Bensonhurst, Elmhurst, parts of Flushing and parts of Chinatown and Manhattan have lower response rates, and we'd be happy to talk about that separately. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, technically I guess second speaker. That would be Amit Baga, Deputy Director of New York City Census 2020. They've been a key driver in a lot of the work that has been happening across the city and represents the mayor's office, the mayor and the city council's efforts to get out the count throughout all our communities. So Amit.
Thank you so much. Sorry, it took me just a moment to unmute myself. Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, Adab. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us here today. Thank you so much to Howard and Mariam at the Asian American Federation. And deepest thanks also to so many of the fantastic partners that have joined us here today, from Chaya to Mingquan to Drum and others. It has been an absolute pleasure to work so collaboratively and closely with the leading organizations across New York City that are on the front lines of advocacy and change on behalf of Asian American communities across the 5 boroughs. So really would just like to underscore how critical their participation and leadership has been in ensuring that we achieve a complete and accurate count here in New York City for all Asian American communities. As Howard mentioned, my name is Amit Singh Baga. I am the Deputy Director of NYC Census 2020, which is the first ever citywide effort to ensure that every single New Yorker is responding to the census. Prior to the 2020 census, the city of New York had not previously invested any resources whatsoever in ensuring a complete and accurate count. And of course, what we've seen in prior censuses is that New York City, at least in terms of self-response, really had been very far behind the nation. Ensuring that we have a complete and accurate count for all of our communities, including Asian American communities here in New York City, has been a top priority for Mayor de Blasio. And this is why he created this campaign at the beginning of 2019, and also endowed it with a $40 million budget, which is by far the largest such campaign anywhere in the country, other than that is being run by the state of California. So we really are very deeply committed. We have been deeply committed for the last year here in the city of New York to commit all of our public resources to ensure we have a complete and accurate count. I'm going to speak briefly today a little bit about the overall contours of our campaign. Certainly, I would suspect that there are many people who have joined us today who are familiar with us or who know about the contours of our campaign, so I won't spend too much time on that. And then I will move along to some examples of the really key ways in which we as a campaign have begun to communicate and have communicated with Asian American communities across the city in ways that we truly believe and hope break down some of the linguistic and cultural barriers that we know our communities face in terms of participating in the census. So if you'll just allow me, I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. Sorry, having a technical difficulty. Please give me 1 second here. Here we are. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen, and I'm going to just go through a quick slideshow. Okay. There we go. Okay, so a little bit by the numbers. One of the key facets and features of our campaign this past year is that the City of New York invested $19 million in creating the Complete Count Fund. The Complete Count Fund is a first of its kind, completely unprecedented community organizing apparatus that was created by the city to ensure that we were resourcing hyper-local organizations as well as citywide organizations across the city to engage in census, organizing, education, and advocacy here in New York City. This fund funded 157 different organizations working in more than 80 different languages across the 5 boroughs to ensure that our communities are being counted. Several of the organizations that are participating in today's briefing were recipients of this fund and really have done tremendous work in ensuring that folks are aware of the census and are participating in the census, especially in the face of some of the greatest threats that the census has faced, from the Trump administration's attempt to add a citizenship question, which fortunately we defeated, but also, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously has created an unprecedented challenge in terms of outreach and advocacy here in New York City. So of the 157 organizations that we funded, 45 were organizations that either primarily or exclusively served Asian American communities. There are many dozens of others that work and continue to work with Asian American communities, but 45 were ones that were really hyper-focused on Asian American communities of all types. To date, we have advertised in more than 40 publications serving Asian American communities. Our campaign has had more than an $8 million budget, which is one of the largest advertising budgets that the city has ever had for a single campaign. And $3 million of that budget, a full $3 million, has been committed to local and community foreign language media. So this is the largest such investment ever made by the city in ensuring that local and foreign language media are really covered. And we have already made an enormous part of that investment, with just over $1 million remaining, which we will be continuing to invest through August and September. We've advertised on 10 different television stations serving Asian American communities and 7 radio stations serving Asian American communities across several languages. This includes Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Bangla, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, and others. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our campaigns. We have had a total of 15 different campaigns that we have run to date as part of our overall communications, marketing, and advertising operation. And several of our campaigns really have been focused on specific communities. And what we've really tried to do with our campaigns is break the mold of what you might think of as a New York City standard government issued campaign. We really would like to be able to reach New Yorkers right where they are in the languages that they speak, and utilizing issues that New Yorkers are really experiencing on a daily basis, even if perhaps it's historically been uncomfortable for the city to do so. So one campaign that we really are proud of and that we are seeing is having an impact, it actually has very high click-through rates amongst Asian American communities, is what we called our Doubled Up campaign. That's sort of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek phrase, but essentially the campaign has a couple of different components. One of the components is really focused on speaking to those New Yorkers who live in basements of multifamily homes. Here in New York City, we have many, many, many hundreds of thousands of multifamily homes, 1 to 2 to 3 family homes, the large majority of which have basements. In many cases, these basements are considered legal basements, meaning that according to the city and according to the Department of Buildings, New Yorkers are allowed to inhabit the basements. And in many cases, the basements are considered illegal. So even if the basements themselves are actually set up in a way where it appears that it can be inhabited, or in some cases, the basements are truly subterranean and really are not necessarily very safe for habitation, we know that there are literally hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who are living in these basements as a result of the variety of intersectional challenges that our communities face, from economic challenges to challenges around immigration and more. And so it really is very important to us to ensure that we are communicating with all New Yorkers who are living in the basements, both the inhabitants of the basements as well as the landlords, to say, participating in the census, which we know has been a barrier historically for folks who are living in these conditions, really is completely safe. When you participate in the census and you provide your address to the Census Bureau, absolutely no harm can come to you as a result. Absolutely no harm will come to your landlord as a result. There will be no communication between the Census Bureau and, for example, the New York City Department of Buildings, which is responsible for often conducting enforcement, right, against such living conditions as a result of participating in the census. So really emphasizing that those folks who live in these conditions, the census is safe, it's completely confidential, and that it is really critically important for all of our communities collectively that we are participating is really a key priority for us. And this is notable for us because, you know, this is the city of New York actually stepping out as part of our census campaign and saying, you know, even this particular housing situation, which, you know, as a general rule, the city would find illegal and would conduct enforcement against, we are taking a very different approach in terms of how we are, you know, communicating with the folks who are in these particular situations, right? And so what you'll see here as part of our campaign, we posit a question: live in the basement? Yes, the census is for you. Your answers can be shared with a variety of agencies. Please make sure to go fill it out. You can see here on this particular slide that we have this campaign in Hindi, Punjabi, Bangla, as well as simplified Chinese. We have it in many other languages as well. Here's another example depicting more of a subterranean basement as opposed to garden level. This is something that's very, very commonly found across the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. And again, here there are several Asian languages that are depicted. I'll move on to the next slide. So one of our flagship campaigns and one of our earliest campaigns that we did, and this was based on extensive research that we had conducted ourselves, as well as extensive research that we relied on from many partners, including Asian American Federation, Asian Americans for Equality, Association for Better New York, and other national groups, is that there was really a sense that people felt as though this census somehow wasn't for them, right? That the census did not apply to them in particular. And the reason that the census perhaps didn't apply to them, leaving aside all of the tremendous benefits that the census really affords all of our communities, is because somehow they felt that they were in a group that it, you know, didn't fall into the definition of the people that the census applies to. Now, we all know, of course, the census applies to absolutely every single person, regardless of age, gender, ethnic origin, the race that you might identify with, obviously your immigration status or citizenship status. And so we created this campaign that really speaks to folks who might find themselves on either end of a particular dichotomy. So for example, under 5 and over 65, yes, you fill out the census. On the lease and not on the lease, yes, you fill out the census. And this was important here in New York City because historically, both here in New York City as well as nationwide, children under 5 are one of the most undercounted populations. People often just don't include them in their census forms. And something like 1 million to 2 million children, it's estimated, were not included nationwide as part of the 2010 census. So that was a really key component for us. On the lease and not on the lease. Everyone here in New York City knows that we have been experiencing a multi-decade housing crisis. And as a result, our housing conditions, as we also saw in our previous campaign, mean that people are living very often in very overcrowded conditions, right? And this includes folks who are many members of a single family living together, but it also includes oftentimes many different families living in the same unit. And oftentimes there's only one person on the lease, but there are so many people in the household, right? And so we want to make sure that we're communicating very clearly to folks that yes, you know, if you are on the lease or if you are not on the lease, the census is for you and you need to be included out in the census. Of course, we do have these campaigns in several other languages. We are choosing to show them in English here just for ease of communication. College students and seniors is another iteration of this. There were several others. Documented and undocumented was a key iteration. That was also something that we put quite a bit of significant investment behind, really to emphasize that, you know, despite the Trump administration's really malicious attempt to add a citizenship question and create fear, mistrust, and distrust of the census is in fact truly safe for everyone to participate in. In addition, we created this campaign to speak again to that same idea that the census is actually in fact applicable to all people. This one is fairly simple and straightforward. It is not making too difficult of a case around the census, but is really speaking to the very, very central ethos that we all experience of either being an insider or an outsider, and essentially saying very clearly the census is really about all of us. It's about all of our communities. We are all meant to participate in the census. It is safe for us to participate, and it is important for us to participate. And again, of course, there's an emphasis on the fact that there are no questions about immigration or citizenship. And these are additional examples of this campaign. We see this in simplified Chinese as well as Korean here. This is one of our earlier campaigns as well, a flagship campaign that we were calling 62%. And in this campaign, and we won't show you all the iterations of it, but really here we were trying to send a very clear message about the importance of the census and tying it to, you know, an experience, a value, an asset, a community asset that anyone can relate to, right? And so in particular, schools are a really, really important part of all of our communities, right? We all want to make sure that our schools are appropriately resourced, that our schools have enough teachers, that our classroom sizes are not too big, that our schools have all of the extracurricular activities that they need to have to truly enrich the lives of our young people. And so this, you know, it is true that the city of New York receives an average of $783 million every single year. That's just 1 year. In Title I funding for schools that are serving low-income communities here in New York City. So if you take that over the course of 10 years, you're looking at billions and billions of dollars, right? And so for that purpose, we really wanted to emphasize that the census is tied to funding for schools. And you will see here again that this particular campaign we have in several languages. Here we have it in English, Punjabi, and simplified Chinese. And here are the many other languages in which this campaign ran. I will move right along. So claps to clicks. This is a campaign we're pretty proud of as well. As COVID-19 set upon New York City, it really could not have been worse timing for the census in New York City. As many of you know, the census went live online for the first time on March 12th. That is the very same day that Mayor de Blasio held his first press conference informing the entire city about COVID really becoming a pandemic here in New York City, or we were on the verge of having it become a pandemic here in New York City. And so really, in some ways, the census here in New York City could not have been dealt a worse hand. So we really wanted to make sure that as people were really consumed, very understandably by all of the concerns surrounding COVID and how to keep themselves safe and their families safe and their communities safe, that we could establish the connection between the census and also healthcare funding. Funding for hospitals, funding for health clinics, funding for a whole variety of sexual health programs, funding for a whole variety of programs for women and young children, also are all tied to the census, right? And on an annual basis, the state of New York receives hundreds of millions of dollars for these programs. And so it really was important for us to sort of take a moment that we were all experiencing, which was the 7 p.m. nightly clap and appreciation for all the frontline workers and tie it to the census and say, if you're clapping today to support frontline workers, make sure to fill out the census for tomorrow. And I should note that for all of the campaigns that we are showing you here, these are the social media images. So in addition to the actual image itself, there's actually about 100 to 150 characters of additional text that you would see in the actual post that actually establishes the connection between what you are seeing in the image and the importance of the census. And so if you were looking at some of these images and saying, well, gee, I actually need, a little bit more information to draw the connection, just want to clarify that that was provided to all of the viewers. So again, we have this particular campaign in many Asian languages. All of the images you see here are real New Yorkers. They are real New Yorkers who are involved in the medical profession and who really were fighting to keep the city safe on the front lines. In addition, we have had a number of different PSAs. I'm not going to play them for you now, but we will of course be very happy to share them with you, and we'll share the links in the chat. We have two PSAs. One is from Kal Penn, a fairly famous Hollywood actor, also formerly a member of the Obama administration. He did PSAs for us in English, Hindi, and Gujarati, emphasizing the importance of the census and really helping the Indian American community in particular understand the need to participate. As you will have noted in Howard's introduction, Indian Americans are among the lowest responding group to the census. We are having a particular challenge this year. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we were speaking to the Indian American community, of course, also South Asian, East Asian communities as well. The Punjabi language PSA that we have produced is of particular importance to us, and I say this as someone who is a Sikh American myself. The very home of the Punjabi Sikh community here in New York City, Richmond Hill, Ozone Park, South Ozone Park, collectively as a set of 3 neighborhoods, they have the second lowest response rate of any area in the city. We are having a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous challenge. These neighborhoods, of course, also do have a very significant Indo-Caribbean population, but what we have seen is that among the Punjabi-speaking community, Punjabi Sikh community, they're really just, the participation has not been there. So it has been a very high priority for us to ensure that we are reaching this community, and we were fortunately able to recruit an artist and sort of a well-known personality by the name of Vishwajit Singh, otherwise known as the Sikh Captain America, who's been a great advocate on behalf of the Sikh community to produce this PSA, which is now running on Punjabi language television and also on various internet sites as well. We also produced several videos that are in Mandarin and Cantonese, so we can provide links to these as well. You will see that these are all iterations of our campaigns. So going from the top left, that's claps to clicks. The one in the center here is one of our and concepts, as is the one right on the top right. And we have some other concepts here as well. So we did also make investments in ensuring all of these videos ran on Mandarin and Cantonese language television here in New York City, as well as on the relevant streaming sites. And I appear to have hit a bit of a snag. Okay. Just a second. Okay, I am going to stop sharing my screen there because it apparently hit a bit of a snag, but these are just some of the many examples of the many different campaigns that we have mounted this year, and many of the different ways that we have really tried to break the mold of how the city of New York speaks to Asian American communities to ensure that we are counted. I'll make one last pitch, which is, as Howard mentioned, we are running out of time. We truly do not have much time left before Asian American communities here in New York City really won't have the opportunity to respond to the census. And one of the challenges that we really are facing is that when it comes to Asian American communities' civic engagement and political participation in general, we've seen that, as compared to many other communities, rates of this type of participation are lower, which means that the needs of our communities, the priorities that we have, and the challenges that we need addressed often go unaddressed. And so it is critically important, and I really emphasize this for all of the press who are participating in today's briefing, emphasizing that it is $1.5 trillion every single year for schools, hospitals, roads and bridges, job training, education, and more that are allocated based on the census, programs and services that each and every single one of us rely on, our communities rely on, and political power. We could lose up to 2 seats in Congress if we do not have a complete count here in New York, in the state of New York. And certainly if we do end up losing seats, there's going to be a question of where we do not have the count from. And if our communities across the 5 boroughs that are mostly populated with Asian American communities are not responding, we're going to lose political representation, which means there are going to be a bevy of decisions from City Hall to Albany to Congress that are about us that are going to be made without us. And so really, this is a matter of our future. This is a matter of our existence. And it is critical that absolutely every single Asian American here in New York City participate and know that their participation in the census is completely safe. It is completely confidential. There is not a single question about immigration or citizenship. And the last point I want to make is that let's not be fooled by whatever the president's attempts have been to manipulate the census. The fact that the president of the United States has attempted now twice, is now in his second attempt to manipulate the census for partisan political gain, actually underscores just how important the census is, right? If we do not participate in this exercise that is the very foundation of our democracy, and we allow attempts to manipulate it to continue, we are doing ourselves a disservice. It is like we are writing a check against our future. So it is critical that each and every single one of us participate. And thank you so much for allowing the City of New York to speak a few words today.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for that very thorough, going over of all the different activities that have been happening, and certainly the great call to action. I think everybody wants to emphasize that. I want to also introduce the next speaker, Nina Luo, Political Director from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's office. Are you online and are you unmuted? Okay, yep, go ahead.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina Lowe, and I am the Political Director for the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for Congress campaign. Making sure that everyone is counted is one of our biggest priorities because we know that the outcome of the census can have long-lasting results in our communities, our schools, hospitals, roads, and even how much representation we have in Congress. Many of the neighborhoods hardest hit by COVID-19 also had the lowest response rates in the last census. So neighborhoods like Elmhurst, Corona, Jackson Heights, which also have a large AAPI population. The 2010 undercount starved those communities of resources for 10 years, and we are on track for another 10 years of underfunding if we don't make sure we are all counted. COVID-19 has made it more difficult to reach the most affected communities, so we must also take it upon ourselves to tell our friends, family members, and neighbors to fill out the census because there's too much at stake. So I want to address the fear of filling out the census in immigrant communities and emphasize that there is no citizenship question on the census. Your community, our city, our state needs everyone to complete the census. Trump's most recent order is unconstitutional and a clear attempt at distracting people. His irresponsible and racist actions will hurt everyone, Republicans and Democrats alike, because without an accurate count in this year's census, the Trump administration is setting up our communities to be under-resourced for the next 10 years. This means less funding for schools, hospitals, roads, and much more. So we're asking everyone to fill out the census now. Trump is not above the rule of law and cannot rewrite the Constitution, and we will not fall prey to his malicious attempts to silence and scare our communities, especially our immigrant communities. So like I mentioned at the beginning, census outreach is really important to the Congresswoman and to our campaign. Some of our efforts, which have already started and will also be ongoing, include a commitment to raise $500,000 for census efforts. Again, $500,000 for census. We are doing census literature drops at doors. and at work sites and small businesses. We are doing census tabling on a weekly basis throughout our district. We are doing phone banking throughout our communities about the census. We're conducting political education about the census and what it means to participate in the census and why it's important. Our website will include census information, and we're also planning on doing a foreign language media roundtable with the Congresswoman herself on this topic. And we will be engaging in some paid media efforts, so some combination of newspaper ads, TV, and or digital, which is mostly TBD, but this is something that we will be engaging in. I just want to close out our statement by, of course, thanking all the community organizations that are involved in this effort, the folks on the front lines of census counting. So Asian American Federation, CHAYA, DRUM, Kwong, and the APA Complete Count committee members. Thank you all so much for your work, and we're looking forward to partnering together in the coming weeks to ensure our communities get counted. Thank you.
Howard, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was just trying to find, I had too many windows open. Thank you for that, Nina. I think that the next person on our speaker list is Aneta from Executive Director at CHAYA CDC. She's going to be talking about her collective role in increasing response rates. Aneta?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Howard. And I want to thank all of my colleagues with whom we've been working closely on this important effort. And really, when I say, Amit, your presentation reminded us of how much has been happening and how great the effort's been. And I really want to applaud you and your team's efforts. So I think it's we've been hearing it, Amit, you said it, we've seen the data, that it's no secret that that the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities are amongst the lowest, have amongst the lowest response rates, and the numbers are in some census tracts, as we know, is as low as 40%, which is, for us raising major alarm bells. The last time around, it was also in the 40s, low 40s. And we had high hopes at the beginning of this process that we could really significantly bring that up to at least a New York City level, and if not, get us even higher to the US level. I think with so little time left, I think that it's become really critical that we find ways to really make it possible and mobilize our communities to respond. So in terms of what CHAYA is doing, so I'll just tell you right off the bat, Amit, you talked about the basement issue. We know that even the numbers that we collected the last go around perhaps was even lower, that number was a misrepresentation of the actual numbers in the community because of basement units and overcrowdedness and mixed dwelling homes, which is a huge deterrent in our community members' ability to respond. So one thing that CHAYA is doing is really trying to break down the myth about who should respond and who the census is for. And so on Tuesday, we will be hosting an event for the South Queens community around the myths of basement apartments and the census. And we've seen some unfortunate social posts that really have steered people away from responding to the census. And we really want to really hit that, directly and remind people that it is absolutely safe to respond. And for all the reasons that we've been talking about so far, that even now it is what we see the sort of weak infrastructures that were highlighted in this time of COVID as well as the Trump administration's recent attempt to undermine the census, that it just, these events just continue to raise the stakes for the census, for our community. And so we continue to really put the word out there to educate our community. I want to also say for the press who are here that it's really important to convey to the community that it's really a brief survey. It's 5 to 10 minutes, and that we are here to help. Chaya is here to help. We know that one of the obstacles has been that there is no South Asian language line. And so organizations like Chaya, like Drum, and others are here to support you in any way you can, and that it is absolutely critical that every single one of our members in the community is counted. So I'll just leave it there and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. That was Aneta Cicheron, from Executive Director of Chaya CDC. Thank you for your words of support and encouragement for our communities to participate. Next up is Fahd Ahmed from Did I get muted? Did everybody hear me? Was I mumbling to myself? So thank you, Aneta. I was muted, wasn't I?
You were fine.
I was fine. Okay. All right. So I guess I'll introduce Fahd Ahmed again, Executive Director at Drum. He's going to talk about the impact of the recent Trump executive memo on our communities and the implications therein. So Fahd, take it away.
Good afternoon. The Trump administration just put out a memo this past week. And the very short summary of it is that after the census is done, they will try to figure out how many of people are actually citizens, how many are undocumented, remove the number of undocumented people, and then use that number to determine political representation and possibly funding on particularly on the federal level. I think the two things that are important, three things that are important to know about this memo is firstly, this on the current census has no impact. They're not doing anything on the census right now. Nothing that they're trying to do impacts the current census. And so we should continue our efforts as is. What they are talking about is after the census is done, sort of how they want to use or manipulate the data. Secondly, it is unclear on what basis they would sort the data. Clearly, the census itself does not have a question on citizenship because we fought against it. So it's unclear how they would even try to sort data to try to figure out who's a citizen, who's not. And lastly, even this attempt to apportion political representation on the basis of citizenship or people being undocumented, it is unclear whether that is legal or not. And most definitely, there are already people that are working to challenge it in courts and strike it down. So I think that's just sort of like knowing a little bit of kind of what was announced in the data and how we should be thinking about it. I do want to emphasize like what is the purpose, the administration's purpose in writing this memo. First and foremost, it is to cause fear and confusion in immigrant and in particularly undocumented communities. They know that our communities live in a state of fear, that even if this plan that they have applies after the census is over, when people are afraid, they are unable to sort through like, okay, will this impact me? Should I fill out the census or should I not? Like people just get afraid and they say like, I'm not gonna fill anything out just to be safe or because it's too much for me to deal with. And then the second purpose, if they're able to carry this forward and actually implement it, would obviously be to reduce the political power of our communities, to reduce the political power of the cities, the neighborhoods where our communities are concentrated, and reduce resources to the neighborhoods, the cities, and the communities where we are. So all of this raises a particular responsibility for the media that is targeted to our communities, and particularly the people that are on this call. I think it really shifts the responsibility of ethnic media from not just reporting, let's say about this press conference that Fahad said this, Amit said that, Aneta said this, but actually the ethnic media itself becoming advocates on what needs to happen. And that the ethnic media has a responsibility to advocate that the census is safe, that nothing related to immigration status is being recorded, and whatever manipulations the administration is trying to do, like they can't individually target people. Secondly, make clear for people what it is that the president's memo is saying and what it is not saying, because that confusion becomes the basis for fear, and that fear becomes the basis for people not filling it out. Thirdly, explain again why the census is important, as many other speakers have talked about, for political representation, for funding representation. I want to share like 2 examples, which I think would be particularly relevant. We saw all these reports of the hospitals in our neighborhoods being under-resourced, underfunded as the coronavirus pandemic hit. Some of that, not all of it, but some of that is going to be based on the census in terms of how many resources get allocated for public health, for hospitals, for healthcare, for resources, for supplies, for staffing. And it is a contributing reason why our communities, our healthcare systems were not prepared to be able to mount the response that was needed. Similarly, the city has been very intentional about figuring out ethnic media buys. Corporations are, always thoughtful about ethnic media buys. These are often things that ethnic media sort of becomes a lifeline, the basis for survival. These are also based on census numbers. So if our communities are undercounted and the data says there's only 10 people in this neighborhood when there's actually 100, then that means the city is actually not going to emphasize ethnic media buys, corporations, all of those things that also impacts ethnic media's own bread and butter. And lastly, I think as Amit said in their closing, these are intentional political attacks against our communities, to target our communities. And if we don't address them, we're essentially saying that like, it's fine, they get to attack our communities. Undocumented people, immigrant people, communities of color. And the best way to respond to these attacks is actually to mount a fight back. And one of the ways to fight back right now is actually to ensure that as part of our resistance is getting the census filled out. That is part of our resistance against these racist attacks on us. I hope this is useful for ethnic media representatives, and that we can carry this out. Essentially, we need a campaign. We need the ethnic media to join us in this campaign to make sure that our communities get counted and are part of the fight back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fahad. So that was so hopefully people are clear about the impact of the Trump memo. I think we're going to move on to the next speaker because we're kind of running behind schedule a little bit. So I want to ask Chuck Park, who's the Civic Participation Manager at Minquan, to talk about how do we get members of our communities to respond, and what are the different tactics that are possible. Chuck?
Hey, Howard, thanks for the introduction. I'll keep it short. Just to reiterate, we have to get this right, and we are running out of time. Like Nina said, like Fahad just said, our communities have been starved of resources for 10 years or more. Past census undercounts in 2000, 2010 turned immigrant neighborhoods in New York City into Tinder. Queens has lost 5 hospitals in the last 20 years. New York City has missed out in billions in funding over the last 2 decades for healthcare, from programs like Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP. It shouldn't be a surprise that New York City has lost almost 23,000 lives to this pandemic. COVID-19 was just the spark. The starving and the drying out of our communities was a direct result of past undercounts. So to say it again, we have to get this right. We're running out of time. We can't survive if this happens for another 10 years. So just to make it very clear, complete the census now. Better yet, corner your friends, your family, your neighbors in your backyard barbecue. Keep 6 feet away from them, but watch them as they awkwardly fill out the census on their phones in front of you. Spread the word however you can. If you are a journalist, if you're a newspaper, then please do repeat all the points that Fahd stated earlier. The census is still safe, it's still secure. This administration's latest memo is toothless, and it should not affect the current collection of census responses. So do fill out the census as soon as you can. We have to get this right, and we're running out of time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chuck. Next up is Howard Wong from CPC. He's the Civic Engagement Manager there. I think you'll be delivering remarks in Mandarin and Cantonese, if I'm not mistaken, Howard. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I was planning to do, because obviously everyone else here already spoken in English, and I'm just gonna repeat some of the key points that everyone's talking about. 大家好，那我们是 APA CCC， 就是我们今次纽约市政府呢，为了这个人口普查的这个2020的人口普查呢，是投资了很多钱，因为我们每10年计算人口的时候是在宪法上呢是决定我们的资源之外，还有我们的政治权力的分配。那我们最近也看到川普政府呢，就是说希望我们计算好人口之后呢，把一些没有身份的移民的人士呢除走。那这个显然是打击我们这个纽约市的地区，因为我们也知道很多人来到纽约市也是没有身份的新移民。所以我们还是需要呢去填写这个人口普查。其实记得在2010年的时候，我们的政府呢，其实因为我们这个人口普查计算的人大概有40%的人没有填写人口普查，所以导致呢政府这洪博当时的那个市长的政府需要去用我们社区的资源去告那个联邦政府，因为他们低估了我们的人口，结果我们少了起码70亿的资金，所以显而易见呢，就是说这个人口普查呢是非常重要。So I'll be also doing it in Cantonese. 所以大家好，我哋係APA CCC， 咁我哋係代表亞洲人嘅一個呢個政治權益團體，咁樣我哋咧係希望咧大家可以嚟填寫呢個人口普查。咁因為人口普查好重要，每10年咧係決定我哋嘅政治資源分配之餘咧，仲有係我哋嘅社區資源分配。記得咧喺2010年洪博政府嗰陣時咧，係因為我哋低估咗人口而損失咗起碼70億嘅資金，所以後嚟佢哋仲要利用市政府嘅資源去同聯邦政府打官司，就因為我哋嘅嗰個資金損失咗起碼70億左右。So I just want to repeat some of the stuff I've said in English. So actually in 2010, if some of you remember, the Bloomberg administration have actually filed a lawsuit against the federal government and the Census Bureau for undercounting our community. And because of that, we lost approximately at least $7 billion over the 10 years. It was estimated maybe perhaps more. So it's important, really important for everyone to fill out the census. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. And finally, we have Mei Li, Executive Director of the Chinese Progressive Association. Mei, are you there? Mei, you might be on mute.
There we go. Yes?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. So I don't want to repeat, I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said, but I do want to add, really emphasize, about the, to encourage everyone needs to answer the census regardless of your immigration status. The numbers in Manhattan, the response rates in Manhattan generally look pretty good. But if you look at Chinatown in the Lower East Side, there are some pockets where it's not as good. And when you look at it a little closer, you'll see those are some of the pockets where either senior citizens live, or there is some public housing, the NYCHA housing, or else there is also somewhere some of the undocumented live. And I would also like to say that this is not a new population. They are longtime residents of Chinatown, but still undocumented. And, and as we like to say, they are here to stay. So they are here to stay. They, they work in our community, they live in our community, and they contribute, and they should be counted. So in spite of everything that you hear, about Trump's, latest announcement that, that the undocumented will not be counted, or he's going to find a way to find out who they are so they won't be counted. It actually isn't very doable, nor do we think it's very enforceable. So please answer the census. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Mei. So I just want to give some time, the time that we have left, we're over by a little bit, for any questions and answers from the press. Ahmed, do you have everyone muted, or can people unmute themselves?
People can start to unmute themselves.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and feel free to either use the chat or ask a question. I'm not seeing any questions. Okay. Feel free to follow up with any of us. We will be supplying the press release shortly. And we will end this call then. Thank you for everyone for participating, and hope that we can get the word out to our communities that the census is important and we're running out of time. Okay, thank you.